Welcome to Cracking Legal Innovation. I'm Anthony Seal, CEO at Legatics, and I'm joined by my co-host, our Chief Commercial Officer, Daniel Porus. Today, we're speaking with Michelle Mahoney, Chief Innovation Officer at Mallesons. Michelle leads the firm's innovation and transformation strategies, covering legal service design, digital strategy, AI, future readiness. She's about, 20 years experience now driving innovation in the legal sector, and she's recognized as a global leader and mentor, actually, in legal technology and transformation. So I think ILTA's been recognizing that recently as well. They've awarded her a Distinguished Peer Leadership Award, and in 2025 gave her an Influential Women in Legal Tech award as well. She has advisory positions at MIT and a number of legal technology companies, and I'm really, really excited to speak to Michelle today, because whenever we meet at places like ILTA, we have such fantastic conversations, and those conversations very often center around data. And I think something that's really struck me is how data-driven Michelle's approach is in a world of sometimes what offends me as someone with a science background, kind of wishy-washy statistics or vibe buying or generally subjective decision-making. So I'm really excited to talk to Michelle today. Really big welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your approach to data. Maybe what do you think makes your approach different to that of what we see in many other firms?
I think, first of all, I work for a partnership. I think that's the first piece to kind of call out to why do I think differently. And when you work in a partnership, there's not typically an R&D fund. There is usually, all profits are just, are distributed at the end of each year. So you're not really building up capital at a level that allows you to do significant R&D or activities. And so when you are getting budget, when you are allocating, when you're thinking about your year ahead, it's really important to ensure you're maximising every dollar and you get the money you need to do the innovation activities. So if you think about that background, and I too love science, and as a consequence, everything that I touch and do is about impact. And so the only way you can demonstrate impact, it's not a feeling, it's not a thought, it's hard data. What was the before, what was the after, what is the delta between those two? Have we validated the hypothesis? And what do we know now? So for me to predicate any of that sort of budget request and delivery, and to deliver impact, you need the data to help you tell that story. So it's the starting point, and it's a critical part of any innovation for us.
And Michelle, how do you think about which data points you want at the outset? Because it's sort of maybe easy to be mid-project and then think, oh, these data points would be great, but almost benchmarking and thinking about the data points that you need.
So let's just say the three of us wanted to create, a product, or we had a product we wanted to test. We would spend time with you before we talked anything about the implementation, anything to do with the testing, saying what data do we have? What will we need to show? What is it that we want to, so what would good look like? What is the success? So before we start anything, we do a data design. And that isn't the data of the product that we're testing. It's got nothing to do with that. We absolutely look at that stuff. But what it is what is the data framework and what is the benchmark today? So what data do we have today? What is our starting position? How often do we do this now? Do we have narration data? Do we have people data? Do we have engagement data? Do we have cycle time? Do we have any kind of data that we have existingly in that pain point that we're seeking to solve? What have we got? Then our second thought would be, what passive data can we collate? So I am a huge advocate of passive data. And what that means is, in the way that we work, in the way we're going to run the experiment, how we're going to do this, can we collect data without people having to enter it? So as soon as you ask humans to give you information, that tends to be problematic. So what can I gather at a passive level that will help me? And so I want as much of that as I can get. And then the third bucket is, what active data can I gather? So we will nearly always, in fact, every time, we will reach out to people and do a survey before we even start of current position, state, sentiment, capability, all those pieces. And we create a user baseline and a capability baseline before we even start anything. So you're thinking about passive data, what's the bonus I can gather along the way? Active data, what am I going to engage with my user base, my analysis piece? How am I going to get that? And then I think the piece that people probably don't think about is that has to be as frictionless as possible. If you're asking someone to participate in a piece of innovation, they want to have the fun bits. They don't want to be starting and recording stuff nonstop. How do I get that out of you in a way that is really lo-fi, simple, and gets you doing it? So creating that flywheel and engagement, because what I need is your activity in my hands in a way I can codify. So that's how we would think about it. After you got the data plan, we would gather all the hypotheses, work out what they are, what is the validation points here, make sure we've got data around all that, and kick off. So a lot around data design.
Maybe just to make it a bit real, Michelle, in terms of some of the examples of the passive data, because I think that's really interesting. Like, what are some examples of how you've been able to capture that passive data?
Logging, so definitely user usage. So usage, time of usage. Are we seeing more in the morning? Are we seeing more at night? Number of times coming into the app versus is it long sessions? Is it short sessions? PQE, how senior are the people using it? How many questions are they asking? Of the type of work they're doing thematically, can we look at that and see, is it just the basic functionality? Are they doing more functionality? How many people have they told? So if we then look at, we've got one individual, how many in that team is now engaging with that? Is there a net promoter score, i.e., are they sharing and recommending this and becoming an influencer within their team? Can we pull that data? So that's even without asking them, we can see how far are we pushing out a network effect. Where is that coming from? There's lots of things you can gather without being creepy that can really help you kind of pull out some of that story. And so for different activities, you'll be looking at different things. We're always transparent about it, and we never go to Michelle Mahoney. It's more for us around thematically, what are we pulling to tell this story?
So you're starting with a number of hypotheses. Are they always sort of ultimately linked to top line or bottom line?
Combination. So typically it would be a typical hypothesis. One will always be, if we do X, it will be better. So your first hypothesis is, if we do whatever it is, we'll do something. So that's your first starting. And can you validate that? The second piece is, when they're using the technology, is it in the flow of work? So questions around that, frequency, usage, applicability, adoption. If we were to remove it, would they want it? You've got a series of questions to really try to get stickiness, impact, effectiveness, accuracy. We would also have, the functionality that we provide is more accurate or effective, or you'd insert right language for that. So it's a series of hypotheses. Often we'd have 10, something around that, and some will be functionality based, people based, impact based. You'd have a series that you would work out for what you're looking at, and then you've got to validate each one. And so the validation is, how do we know we've validated it, and how is yes?
And does that relate back to goals of the firm, or would you choose happier associates, or would clients winning business, being more efficient, delivering the deal faster? What are these? It could be any.
Yeah, all the above. Remembering for us experimentation, so separate to ROI, which we can talk about later, but just in an experiment or in that real, because we're a very strong experimentation model. You've only got 4 to 6 weeks. We time box everything because our lawyers are busy, we're busy, and we're trying to can we get to value in a short period? We are trying to work that out. And so when we do that, you're looking at your hypothesis. So could you say our lawyers' engagement is 300% better? In 4 weeks, that's very hard to get to. So you're trying to think about what would move the dial here. So are people, engaged? Are they saying they feel better when using the technology? Is their time? Are they working more hours? You're trying to do measured approach. You'd love these metrics around, will they be placed? But in a 4 and 6 week period, you're talking about what can I validate in that period? And so you're trying to get the thematically that glide or the trend line around, actually, I really enjoy using this. This activity I used to think was really, I would hate to start it. Now I love getting into it and I love getting it done. You try and pull that sort of data through as examples. Definitely impact, client impact, people impact. They're absolutely on the list.
I'm interested, Michelle, you talked about the distinction between passive and active data points. And it made me think, I remember when I was practicing, there was a big drive to capture more baseline information around how we were doing our work. So we introduced more billing codes and sort of narrative line items that we would submit. It made sense in theory to capture all the different parts of the transactional work. But then there was the reality of how people actually inputted it. And there's a difference between the theory of capturing the relevant data points and then the practical implementation of it. How do you think about that when capturing the active data and the people side of doing it effectively?
So I think Nirvana is 9,000 pieces of data, 100% accurate and entered at the time of impact. If you can get, damn the humans, if you can get someone to do that, I'd love to meet them. The reality is frictionless data collection has to be your aspiration. You have to design for that. That's where the win is trying to get it as frictionless, as simple, as engaging as possible so that the user thinks, actually, I'll just quickly do that, rather than this is an overhead, another thing to do. The complexity point, would I love to have more data? And I do have a lot of data, I have to be honest, but you're trying to constrain the amount of data to high quality data. So if I ask you 30 questions, I'm not going to get great answers. If I ask you 5 that will really go to these points I can't get anywhere else, and that's the other bit about the data mapping. Can I get these answers anywhere else before asking the user? Because that active data, high cost, high friction, hard to get accurate, so you're looking at, is there any other way I can passively gather this? And then the answers you're looking for from your users is going to be a small number. We will pop it up in the way you work. We have logbooks created that just come in where you're working. We make it incredibly easy for you to give us that data, and we design for that. So it's not accidental. It's not a last minute thought. The way we're going to collect active data is really quite sophisticated, and we spend a lot of time thinking about that. So we can just get you to click a button, which is a choice. So you really got to go for gold on what you want.
I think humans are very hard to study. The second you ask them a question like, was this piece of legal technology a success? They immediately start thinking like, if I answer like this, does it just show that I didn't pay attention in the training? Or, it's meant to be a success, therefore maybe it's me and not the technology or something like that. Or firms trying to drive technology usage. I want to look like a technology forward lawyer, therefore I'm going to sort of be positive about this or something like that. I do think the passive data collection, like, did they actually log in? Because if it was useful, they'll log in again. I do think there's a lot to be said there, so I can really relate to what you're saying.
I think on that people piece as well, like there's the one other element that I've thought about a lot now as I've sort of been out of practice a little bit longer, even trying to capture what the baseline is around how much time you spend on certain tasks. I remember being told you should absolutely write down all the time that you're spending on a particular task. And I remember one partner even referring it to me as, if you don't do it, it's like you're stealing from the firm, because you need to capture all of that and it should ultimately be a decision for the firm. I remember as a junior lawyer where I'd done my work reviewing a sale and purchase agreement and I know it's okay, but I want to review it one more time. And I felt silly about putting the time down to do that. So I felt like that's me waiting sitting in the office for an extra half hour or whatever it is to review it. And I didn't put the time down. So there's a little bit of what is captured, and then there's the deeply human aspect of how are people actually doing some of these things. So I don't know, I was just thinking as you were speaking, Michelle, it's almost like the more you can have the passive data could be more accurate in some ways than the active piece.
If you work with lawyers, they self-discount, right? Because they are looking for outcomes. They are driven by, oh, look, I just did a second time from my own ear. I want to recheck that clause. I thought I had it. I just want one more time. The client shouldn't pay. I just want to double. We are perfectionists by nature. And so I think you find self-discounting all the time and everywhere because people are constantly critical about their own behaviour around, I should have got that done in half an hour. Why did it take 45 minutes? And that's why the combination of the passive and active is a really nice augmentation, because you're seeing what are we pulling here? So one of the examples for us is we have a systemic enabling strategy. So for me, it's less about technology and more about people. And so one of the things we have is anytime you use a piece of legal tech that drives efficiency, because that's a core principle of our organisation and one of our priorities, when you fill in your timesheet, because you have to do that anyway, you can just select when you're doing it the multiplier. So it's one of our enabling capabilities. And when you select the multiplier, it selects which product did you use, how much time did you use it for. When you do that, it's got a multiplication thing. So to get to your daily target, it gives you a 1.5 uplift. It doesn't charge the client. It's an internal uplift to give you an offset because of the efficiency, to hit your numbers and to help you. You just click 2 buttons to do that. And then you type in, you don't give me anything else. You type in iteration, the activity, what you were going to do anyway. And by adding 2 clicks, I now can tell you how often anyone in my organisation or client matters has used which technology, for how long, I can augment that against my data set out of the technology, but it also gives me a whole lot of matter-based, industry-based, a whole lot of information.
The firm will literally credit that lawyer for hitting their billable hours at a kind of 1.5x because they know and you've measured and you've checked that the technology increases. So the lawyers are sort of neutral incentive to actually use the technology.
Well, we know, so when you think about innovation, I think at the heart of it, what you're doing is change. Like, I know we all get excited about stuff, but I'm trying to convince you that the way you've worked, which you probably think works well, you've adapted to, you've got workarounds, it's worked really well for you forever. I'm trying to convince you there's a better path. And humans generically don't really like that better path. They like the way they've always done it. And so I need to get you to do that. And so if I give you a more effective way, that's the point of technology, to scale, drive effectiveness and efficiency and those sorts of attributes. In order to do that, that goes against time required if you're in an hourly-based system. Will we always be in an hourly-based systems? No, we won't. Historically and currently, we're in that hybrid moving. And so we're all hourly-based or moving around that sort of basis. And so I don't want to disincentivize by reducing your hours because that's a key metric to use on performance.
Like, there's so many innovation teams we speak to who are trying to kind of do the opposite, get associates to reduce hours, and then all of the incentive structures in the rest of the firm is trying to get them to increase hours, or what, and it's just not an aligned strategy. I don't know. I don't know whose idea that was, but like you feel it feels like you're so much more aligned with. Was it your idea?
Yeah, well, we did. So it was really a strategy. We've got a whole digital transformation program, which we rolled out. We've been doing this since 2020, that program. So for us, just, anytime you're using technology, that we certify the technologies, every time they use it, they get a 1.5 multiplier because we know the return on investment on time, effort, activity, and process means that the time they spend doing activities is reduced.
Has this replaced the innovation hours that I know you launched previously, or is this in addition to?
In addition. So we have 30 hours for every lawyer to spend time on legal tech, innovating, teaching, coaching, learning, trialing, talking to clients about it, all the above. Every lawyer gets 30 hours every year. So that's called use it and lose it. That goes towards your productive total. So we have 30 hours there. And then in addition to that, we give you this multiplier as well. The thing about the multiplier is strategically and motivationally, it's aligned for change and really drives it. So it makes a huge difference on that. In addition, I get a huge amount of data collected. So I can tell you which clients we're really driving value, impact. So it's to the point of I'm getting active data, but I'm doing it in a really discreet way that doesn't have a big overhead. 2 clicks on the way through that you were doing anyways.
It's just so refreshing. Like the number of firms we talk to where the innovation team are working against the firm, to see the team so aligned, so empowered, it's just super, super refreshing. I've been for years, we're telling firms to operate with better outcomes for clients more efficiently. And you've got one team pushing it and then so many disincentives from the rest of the firm. So I must say, it just feels so refreshing to hear.
I find it interesting. I mean, just even in the last 2 weeks, one of the biggest challenges is, although efficiency works, the conversation has been around efficiency works in certain areas which are subject to alternative fee arrangements, capped fee, fixed fee. You can quantify their efficiency means we're improving the outcomes for us as a firm because we're reducing write-offs, or in fact with capped fees, we're actually, being more profitable in how we're delivering the work. But the counter to that is where there's not as much fee pressure at the moment to, what's the incentive to innovate, to be more efficient if I could otherwise charge out the time? And again, our conversation earlier about the deeply human aspect of it, the partners have numbers on their head that they have to deliver in terms of, billable hours. The junior lawyers have targets. So if they know that they could spend, and I remember it as an M&A lawyer, if I knew I've got a really big M&A deal that I'm doing and I'm running due diligence, and it sucks in a lot of ways because I'm working 16 hours a day, but I'm working 16 hours a day and I am going to be ahead of my target, which means that when it's feast and famine, then when it's a quieter period, I'm ahead and I don't, feel quite so useless. And I think it's one thing if you're making the work more fulfilling, you're reducing the number of hours, but as an M&A lawyer, I know I'm going straight off one piece of work onto another. Or there are those incentives, like you mentioned, Michelle, that I'm getting a multiplier because although I'm doing it in less time, I'm still being credited with doing it, in a more effective way. But I think for a number of firms, they're still really struggling with how they make that transition for the type of work where there's not as much of the fee pressure. It's a better outcome for the client, but it's still the internal incentives for the law firm mean that it's difficult. And the conversation still seems quite disconnected in that way. There's one conversation for more of the alternative fee arrangements and then a different one for the different types of work.
I think one of the things I would observe is people jump very quickly when you talk about, let's talk about generative AI as a concept around productivity gain. And I actually think there are multiple things occurring there. To your point about fee pressure, and I'll come back to it, because I think if you think about these tools and how you can engage with them, there's a number of outcomes. And one example that we use often is this cognitive sparring partner. And what I mean by that is I've just created a board pack. I'm about to submit it. I've just created a piece of advice and I'm about to send it off to my client. If you put that into generative AI, it's incredibly good at tell me what thematically are the key points here. Because I think there's 3 points. Did they come through when I've drafted that? Saying, what are the first 3 questions? What are the top 3 questions a board member might ask me? Reflecting on that and going, did I actually, God, have I answered that in the pack? No, they're gapped. Yes, I have answered it. How would I respond? Or what are the next 3 things a business should do with this advice? What are the actions that they're actually going to do? If you're using it, all the top 5 gaps that I've got, tell me what I mean. Like, if you're using it in that way, even though whether you're under fee pressure or not, you're actually creating a better outcome. You're spending more time on that work that I think is around quality, impact, commercial thinking, all that kind of piece that you can do. And so often when you think about, if I can get a productivity gain, I can get the data wrangling faster. They'll find the right documents, surface the right information. Who wants to pay for that? Like, I get why clients don't want to pay for that. That's just, where is that document? Let's hunt, let's find. If I've got that at my fingertips and now I've got the data, what you can actually then do with that is actually the more interesting piece. And I think if you're only looking for a productivity gain, you're probably not in the right game. To your point about, fee pressure, I think what you're looking for is there are some activities where there is productivity gain, check. There are others where you're probably not going to get a productivity gain, but what you will get is this deeper thinking, cognitive sparring partner, really finessing your thinking and taking you to a much more considered level. I think it's the combination. And so different work types, I think, manifest differently. For some areas, you're going to definitely get productivity gain, and it will definitely have it. For that more complex work where you're saying, I don't think they'll ever perhaps go like that, I would challenge you to say using AI in ways that actually take your thinking to different places, really fortify your work, your responses, what you think. So I think there's lots of different ways technology can come in and probably will affect your billing model. But, I think people need to probably think not just about productivity and think about lots of effective ways they can use it.
Does that then get harder to measure if your legal advice is more commercial, say, and that's a great outcome for clients? Clients are always asking for more commercial legal advice. How does that come against the measurement piece?
Really hard. So to your point about that, it's the content itself that's more measurable, right? So if you've recorded, just say it took you 2 hours to do the advice, it still takes you 2 hours to do the advice. But what you used to give was an email or a letter. You now give an email plus an action plan. That's way more impactful, right? Like that's advice that can be implemented, right? Like that's the holy grail of what you're trying to do to your clients, which is enablement and outcomes. Where am I measuring that? How can I find that? Much harder to track and identify. You're looking at now your service levels. You could actually do some work about extraction of the invoices to work out what have we shifted on billing, what services are we now deploying, what are our narrations say. We spend a lot of time analysing narrations. Are we seeing a difference in the type of work we're doing? What type of work are we doing for clients? You're starting to try to pick that up, and we do a lot around pricing and future of how we might think about that. So you are using data there, but it's harder to drill that. And so having really good insights around what have we got, what can we pull, what documents are attached. You try to look at that kind of data where you can.
Is there a role for GenAI in analyzing things like billing data from a qualitative sense, or maybe even, I don't know, maybe this is taking it too far for today, but analyzing how commercial perhaps emails are or end advice pieces are to clients? When I was a scientist, the data was like numbers and text analysis. You could maybe look at like word frequency or something like that. But I imagine that in the science world, there's a sort of sciencey, unsciencey way of starting to do qualitative data analysis using AI that could be pretty good actually when you do have messy billing data and okay, somebody may have spent this long on a CP process or something like that, but they may have tagged it as CP process, they might have tagged it as something, they might have described it in a completely different way, but maybe there's a good way of starting to add some of that up.
Yes, we absolutely use AI on billing. Absolutely. To conform with billing, to make sure it's concise, to make sure it's accurate, to make sure all those things. But yeah, I think the terrible thing about hourly 6-minute recording is that it's awful to do. The great thing about it is you've got a huge amount of data. And that data then ends up on your invoice. So you have got an extraordinary data stream. And if you're not tapping into your narrations, you're learning and really going to that next level about thematically what this is telling us, where is it heading, sentiment-wise, what type of activity are we doing, which client. There is just a huge richness around that. And even if you're pulling out the key elements or you're modifying those key elements, it's telling a story, and that's having a chat with the partners around, actually, you used to do a lot around this, we're now simply doing this, what shifted here?
Michelle, something you just touched on, which I know we've discussed previously, is the role of data and storytelling. Do you want to maybe just touch on a little bit how you think about storytelling and the role that data plays in doing that?
So I think there's way too much information we're all absorbing. Everyone's busy. We read, there's too many emails, too many packs. And so what we need to do is create emotion and human connection. And that's how memories are formed. That's how decisions are often made. That's how people, the best of us only thrive. So a storytelling is around connecting a human element, bringing out data points as heroes. So 72% or 28% said 94% of our people use Harvey daily. 27%, like whatever your data is, you're trying to get a hero piece for people to have that aha moment of, oh, gosh, 90%, that's a lot. Or 10% disagree. Oh, that's very low. We shouldn't be thinking about it. So you're using data in a way to validate a story, but you're also using it as a hero piece. And so by having hard data in your story, it's not Michelle thinks, Michelle says, Michelle recommends. It's based on this data from 200 people. That said, we found those hard data pieces anchor your narrative and bring to life with humans. When we spoke to 200 of our senior associates, interestingly, they all loved it. But what we also found was you're trying to bring that to life, trying to bring in both quantitative and qualitative into the story, and really getting the voice of the user into the story to tell the impact. So it's not my voice, it's a lawyer here, Daniel, you're trying to bring that in a short way that can bring to life. And often those one-liners that really encapsulate the sentiment are incredibly effective, because I'm not saying all lawyers love X. I'm bringing it to life through a line, a person that people can connect to. And I think that really makes a difference.
I think it's interesting because ultimately, and sorry, maybe this isn't fair to fully frame it this way, but a large part of the role is for you and the team is sales, right? What are the data points that make people truly believe? It's not just Michelle thinks, Michelle says, it's the data tells us X. And then combining that with some of the qualitative, as you said, I imagine the nature of the data points and maybe some of the qualitative assessments that you pull differ slightly depending on the persona that you're targeting, Michelle, because there's a role getting lawyers to actually use and adopt the technology. There's getting the partners to be bought in to a certain action, the senior leadership, providing budget to continue to invest or invest more in certain things. And then there's the client piece as well. You want to maybe speak to how you think about the different roles of data, narrative, storytelling in those different personas?
I think the persona is critical. So I think anytime you're, telling a story, influencing, and your point is we're in sales on it, all day, every day, is the key piece about is what will move the dial here, what resonates here. I mean, if you aren't thinking about, I always find it amusing when people say, I told them this, they don't seem to know it. It's actually, sorry, you're the one giving the message. It's incumbent on you to deliver it in a way that's memorable. It's not their job to receive it because they're receiving so much information on a daily basis. How is it memorable? And the only way you can do that is to resonate at your audience. And so the way you need to think about your audience is you've got a full day. You've had 15 back-to-back meetings, on a good day maybe 10, just shifting from things, what can make what in this meeting can shift the dial? What is the information you need to make a call? What are you going to really care about? They're the bits you've got to really think about. So each audience does have different criteria, and our messaging, we shift to that, and the data points that align with it. So for, if you're worried about people engagement, it's all about, what do people deeply care about? What would move that? Where's longevity? You'd move to that. If it's all about reinvestment, how can I show the ROI now? What are the indicators of ROI so far to get further investment? If it was a failure, what did we learn? What do we take forward? You're constantly looking for, how do I package this in a way that for you to make a call, I've given you the pieces that would say this is a good use of your time, or a good spend, or a good investment. So you're looking at that. And I think for partners, you're telling a story in two ways. A story they can tell with their clients, because often they're out with clients. They are absolutely out with our clients and talking to them, and they're part of our sales force. Absolutely. So you're looking at, how does this impact clients? What is the impact here? How can we share it with them? And then our people. So you're absolutely looking at both of those lenses the whole time. And we rarely, if ever, talk about ourselves. It's always, well, I met with, and a good example of this, we've heard about, you're trying to bring to light that I know you're busy and you can't get across and speak to everyone. Let me bring the organisation to you. Here's what we're seeing. And I think shining a light in that way really gets them across what's happening, gives them the sentiment piece, gives them the data piece, and gives them a view. I always think it's interesting where people say, oh, I personally don't use it. How does that help the audience? You're trying to get to that piece where you can really understand the impact and inform me in a way that says 94%. That's quite a lot. Is that all groups? What groups? Like, you're trying to give them that feeling around, what do I conclude from that? I think data for data's sake, I'm not a fan of. Data to tell a story and a narrative, incredibly effective.
I do wonder whether that really effective storytelling is why you've basically managed to change such a fundamental sort of unit economic. If you can change that associate incentive structure on something pretty fundamental, the number of hours you're there, to be so leveraged by technology and so different. There's not many firms that are quite able to make that fundamental a change to their metric system. And I think maybe some of that really effective storytelling might have been a part of that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that resonates.
I think it's a combination of being able to use strong data to objectively tell a story. And when we don't have good data, I'm really open about that. Look, the data's inconclusive. I'd love to tell you we have more, we just don't. Yeah. So I think you'd be really transparent about that. And so I think there is trust built when you're using data in a way that is authentic, and I think that piece. And then I think the storytelling plays a part if people can feel like they can see a vision, there's enthusiasm around, the why, the what's in it for me, how do I sell you? I think those pieces packaged are, humans want that piece, right? And we're all busy, or we're all trying to get to the, how do we get to the end point of the day, the decision, the project, So I think you're right, storytelling is really important, but I would say the data that underpins it is really important. And thinking about, it wouldn't be unusual for me on the start of a project to think, how am I going to tell this story at the end? That's not unusual for me to have that with the team and say, so just stop. What does good look like? Let's play that forward. So in 6 months' time, in 2 months' time, in 9 weeks, what does the report say here? What does that one line say there? Like, thinking that through to say, how will we get from here to here, I think is a really important piece, almost a pre-mortem, almost that before we even start, let's try to think about that.
So obviously storytelling is a big piece of communicating. We've talked about the ROI sort of side of things, like storytelling plays a role in that. But ultimately for the ROI piece, you are having to justify, these investments and think about what is the ROI. Something which I've found interesting recently is I've been spending quite a bit of time in the US, and the narrative seems to have shifted somewhat around ROI. And I've heard it multiple times now with people saying, particularly with generative AI, that it's a move to either an inability to quantify or just the qualitative being more important, with regards to technology investments. I don't know, it's surprised me quite a bit, even some of the senior people I've heard speaking about on this topic, but I'd love your sort of reactions to that, Michelle. Like, do you think even with generative AI that there's that ability to continue to quantify what the ROI is and what role data plays in quantifying ROI?
I guess the starting premise is that I don't understand why, when I'm spending $10 on, an operating system, I can ROI that. But when I'm spending $10 on GenAI, I can't. Like, if you think you're a board or a CFO or an exec team, money coming out of the partnership, everything should be able to be validated in an ROI. So for me, I don't think GenAI is any different. I think anytime you're making a significant investment for the future of the firm, it needs to have ROI metrics around it. I'm not on the camp of we'll work it out. It's all too hard. We'll see. I'm not saying people are saying that, but I'm saying I don't buy into that. So if we think about GenAI ROI as an example of that, the way that I've thought about it is I too don't know. I think the whole planet is trying to work out what are the 3 success, metrics, what are the 5, what is the magic metrics that we should be measuring, and there's a few things that I think are obvious. Adoption predicates impact. And so I think, it's obvious to think that maybe adoption's important, and I would concede and agree with that. But I think you can step back and be a bit more circumspect and clever about how might I validate this over a period of time. And so for us, what we've done is I've thought about what are the strategic goals of the organisation? How do I wrap those goals into the GenAI strategy and goals? And so we have 7 key goals that we think about on our GenAI strategy. And then with each of those goals, we have objectives. And then under each metric, we have a baseline and a target. And so we have 23 metrics, in fact, for our ROI on our GenAI usage. Some of those are lead indicators and some of those are lag indicators. And that's really important, right? And so the combination of those is that we now have a significant number of metrics, probably many than most, and we're measuring those very actively month in, month out. Will I have 23 metrics in maybe 18 months, 2 years' time? I suspect not. Will I have the same? Possibly not. But at the moment, what I can't tell you is what are the 4 that really do show impact and return. And because we're all trying to work out, is there an impact with people? Is there impact with client revenues? We're all trying to work out where is the ultimate impact. Apart from, I think it's very easy to say, have I got adoption? Yes, no, where is it at? Passive data will tell you that very easily. So for us, we've really thought about, let's collect a whole lot of data. Let's look at those metrics and then let's be really circumspect about which ones are moving the dial. So because this metric's gone up, is it actually an impact to the firm? So if everyone says to me, I've got really high adoption, I'm like, fantastic. What's the impact of that? I get people using the tool, but so what? Tell me what that's done. So you're trying to find out which metrics really tell you the so what, which really has moved the dial. How can I actually justify? And for me, I think it's having a buffet to start with and then really analysing deeply those and then picking out a smaller subset. You probably don't want to get this many for a long period of time because you'll lose your mind. But what you're trying to do is sort of let me get informed and then I'll, restrict it down. So we think about it quite differently. I don't think it's right or wrong, just a different way. And I have got ROI expectations on anything you do, and I think that's good practice for business. So I sort of come at it from that angle.
Does that mean you've been able to really effectively define use cases? Because I know a lot of firms are thinking this is so important, this is an absolute phase change, a revolution, the new internet's come along, that this is just something we have to do. And a lot of firms are actually even just struggling to find use cases. They're or thinking the right approach is just to give it to all the lawyers and they'll find their own use cases, or there's too many use cases, or they're too nuanced. Then use cases like your advice is a bit more commercial. You missed something that you may not have known that you would have otherwise missed or something. And they're too varied, they're too big. So does that mean you've got all your use cases nailed, or do the metrics look at something else?
So I think one of the things I would say, this isn't binary. I think people love to kind of go on off and stuff. It's very nuanced. So each practice group we look at and look at use case, pain points, high usage, where we are, all that kind of stuff. And then we have use cases by group, and then those really high group usages we convert into, for us, agents and workflows. So, really understanding the use cases and areas that require really complicated prompting, we would step in and try. The innovation team would draft. We've got a lot of safe prompts, a lot of really quite sophisticated workflows. But we step in to give you a better outcome because they're a high velocity activity. Let's get you a better outcome on those. So we're actively engaging with our users on that, on where is the impact, how can we make this better for you. So I think the thing that I would say here that is the hardest thing I've ever done in my career, and I've been doing this for a long time, is historically I'd give you a tool, I'd do the training, I'd give you the tool, I'd say, call me when it stops working, call me if you need a hand, but off you go. Gen AI, because we're all still learning and we're on a journey, you've got to have this flywheel with your user at all times. You've got to create them sharing and telling you what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they've learned, what they need. And so you can't do that from a helicopter. You can't do that without contact. You can't do that without engagement. And so you've got to find lots of ways, hundreds literally, of ways to gather that data and understand it. So we categorize all our use cases. We look at high frequency usage. We look at, what kind of each practice group, what those are, what ones work. We share which ones don't work. If it's not good at this, don't recommend it here. This works really well. So we're constantly having those conversations, and every week we profile areas of success, areas to learn from. All those are our people's stories. So every week we have prompts of the week, lessons learned every single week, and they're all coming out from our users because they're constantly in the practice. So it's different to what we've done before. And I think anyone who thinks the use cases will come to them, I would say I'd challenge that. You've got to go and be at the point of where it's happening, and you've got to really create this momentum. And if you give me something, I have to give you something in return. It's how humans work. So if you're going to tell me about a use case, I need to fix your pain point, give you a prompt, help you with, what is it that I can help you with? So I think thinking about that exchange is really important. So I think that would be how I would think about use case gathering, categorization, and extraction.
That's fascinating. I'm curious as to how you find the vendors in the space. So do they help on this journey? Are some better than others? Do they provide the data? Do you pick providers based upon who does provide the data? What's the vendor landscape like?
I'm in a very lucky position in that I work for an extraordinarily large organisation with a very decent budget. So it is easier for me to have this conversation with vendors. So I want to concede, if you don't have any leverage in that relationship, it is hard to demand anything. And nor should you be unrealistic, but I'm just saying it is slightly different. So I would only, if we're selecting technology, we will absolutely have a very deep discussion about passive data collection. Can you tell me how many users daily? Are you tracking users? Can you tell me about, we will be absolutely all over that because we track and we have dashboards that pull out that stuff for us to know ROI, impact, users, all that stuff. So we live and breathe that. So if there's a piece of tech that was the best piece of tech I've ever seen, and they said it's a black box, I can't tell you anything about anyone using it, that's not for us. We would say, look, we're delighted to work with you on what we need. We'd be happy to help with that, but here's what I'm needing. So we're at the point of we just wouldn't entertain without data, baseline data, and certainly, augmenting that. And over time, we tend to often pull it out of your products. So from a vendor's perspective, it's not that we don't love your product, but we'll augment it and pull it into a BI dashboard. So we'll often harmonize the data, look at volumes, practice group. We augment it with our AD data so I can get profiling around which sub-team, which location. I don't want to know about individuals. This isn't a story about anyone individually. This is much more a story about what are we seeing groups doing, teams doing. And so we really augment that and tell a story. So either you let me get it out of your product, and we love to do that, and we're not trying to take anything else out. We're just trying to get that user data out to help us with that storytelling and access. The more data you can provide me, the more I love it. And that's not data for data's sake, but it's about really being able to sell the value. I think that's critical. And I think for early products, I get that's tough because often you're trying to deliver functionality that people care about, which is the UI and the function. Get that, and I know I'm painful and annoying, but actually if you want to make sales and if you want to be able to talk about series raises and all those sorts of things, being able to tell your story about how many users you have, how those are critical data points. So monthly users, daily users, all that kind of stuff is really important.
I think it's an interesting one for us because I've actually been quite surprised how even some of the big vendors are quite poor in terms of some of the data points that they do provide. And we made a decision quite a few years ago now to have a standalone dashboard that actually provides key data points. But I'm still conscious that even then, it's really hard for people in your role, Michelle, where you've got the data in different formats. You've got some, but not all of the data points necessarily from service provider A and then a different from service provider B. So what more do you think, even with the leverage that you were discussing and being able to sort of have certain demands, like what more could your providers do to help you on your data-driven innovation journey and everything that you're doing internally?
It's a good question because I think we've made a call that it's really hard for some providers to do that. And so we've augmented by extracting and using AI actually to analyze the data sets and normalize it. And we get it from here this way, this way. Can we make these data sets similar? How can we add data to make them augment? So we spent a lot of time in trying to normalize the data sets into a way that we can use it. And then we'll use thematics and things over the top to look at patterns and issues and those things. Having a standard around this, probably some baseline things I think we all would like. So unique user identification is really important, trending and time of indication. You try and work out, so if I step back, what does success look like when you're purchasing legal tech? The answer for me is creating a daily habit. We want you to daily be in this. We want you to be, it's a first principle. We use this because it's more efficient, it's more effective, you're trying to actively create that habit. And so the data I'm looking for is to show how many people have I created that habit with, and it's a sustained habit. That's ultimately what I'm trying to understand, because that's what success is. I can buy as much tech as I like, as shiny as I like, as effective as I like. If people aren't actually getting outcomes, then it's of no use to me. So that's what I'm ultimately trying to do. And I think about it at a behavioural science method, which is, are they only logging in the morning? Why are they never logging in? Why are they logging in here? You try and understand that. So I think it's not about, I'm trying to give your software a hard time. It's not about that. It's trying to work out, how am I causing these daily habits? How am I causing this to be the first thing in front of mind? And we could do this better. And then why are they never looking at the comparison tool? Why is that happening? So that's a fantastic piece. Let's get a story about that. Let's get a user story out. Let's get a client story out. Let's go and do some training on that. Can we get the grads in and let's do a boot camp with them around why that might be impactful? Like, you're trying to find new ways around, why is it that we've only got this and not this? You're doing gap analysis constantly to kind of go, why is this not happening? Or, is the comparison really crappy? Okay, let's get on the functionality. Let's find out why our lawyers don't love it. Now let's try to get it on their roadmap for change. Like, I think you're using it for success. It's not really there just to say, I bought this technology, I need to show we're using it. Yep, yes, you probably should. I think the bigger factor here is how we actually getting this change of behaviour. And that's where you're going to drive momentum, culture shift, and real impact. And I think, people actively getting, this is expected of you. We want you to experiment. We want you to try these things. And that's what a culture of innovation is. It's, going that, it's using personal exertion time, right? Like, we know you've got a full day, but if you give it a go, try it. Let's try and make it worth your while. Let's try this more. We've got the hours. It's more, we've got the multiplier. We're trying to create this we know it's risky. You had a process that worked beautifully. We're asking you to try something new. That's high risk for a human. Let's think about how we can de-risk that for you so that you can get some return on that. I'd spent an hour on it. It didn't work. Okay, I've got 1 hour towards my productivity. I use the tech, so I get a 1.5 multiplier. And I now know that I need to either get some help on my prompting, or I need a different tool. There's a net effect on that. So you're trying to think about that, I think, in everything you do.
Something we've found is that what we started providing as kind of usage type metrics has actually morphed into really interesting kind of data in its own right for other purposes. So we've talked a lot today, I think, about like efficiency, ROI on legal tech, on our initiative successful. But we started to find things like just giving out the transaction participants. Firms were starting to use that to actually do things like market mapping and look at things like, we see just from our own data set that you used to come to us for all your funds work. And now we see you popping up with on the other side of a transaction somewhere else. Or can we look at like our CRM data and work out who actually has that relationship, or even start correlating things in Negatics against kind of capacity data or what's coming up next, or we know that these kinds of deals in this region or this practice area take absolutely ages or always run on or are never profitable. Like, what's actually happening on the processes of those transactions? And for us, I actually see that as a lot of the future of what we do is providing actual sort of like, we have everyone using the product for its individual sort of per matter benefits, but actually the kind of strategic decisions you can make at a firm level when you are running everything as a process and starting to use that for billing, for pricing, for resource allocation, for work, it's actually quite a different proposition in itself. And I think it's also really interesting that there's a whole piece around like providing additional context to GenAI. And I'm starting to actually think of us as like almost more important as a data product than as a workflow product. So I'm curious as to where you see some of the sort of future applications of data and the spheres where it might be useful in practice beyond measuring efficiency and ROI.
So I think the biggest challenge with data is lack of imagination. So, often if people provide a data set and they'll look at it and go, that shows me occupancy, that shows me whatever, deal flow, whatever it might be. I think that's a rendition or perspective of an underlying piece of data. There, to your point, there are so many other things you can do with that. And so I think the challenge I would say to people is the lack of imagination around, okay, so I've got this data, now what else can I find about it? And often people say to me, oh, where's the data insights? I'm like, well, hang on, what is it you want to know? Like, it's the knowing question there, right? So why is this client not engaging anymore? Why is the deal flow suddenly choppy? The why questions are what you're trying to get to. That's what insight comes from. The insights don't pop out magically. I'm sorry, I wish they did. They don't self-identify and pop out. It's the deep why that you're trying to get to. So I think if you're not curious, and if you're not sort of starting to think about and I think the other one that's an unlock is correlation of two data sets, where you kind of go, I've got the Legatics data and I've got my data. I mean, when I bring that together, what is it that it can tell me? What are the gaps I'm missing? That's when you start to see it. So I think multi-party data absolutely going to be a thing, because you're going to see variety of perspectives. You might have some lead indicators in one, lag in the other. How can I actually look at these two things together to inform strategy, movement, resource prioritization, training, all those things that we need to do, first of all. Second of all, I think phase one of legal tech, and phase one of generative AI and any of the automation technologies and things that we use has been very much around, to this point, taking a current process and making it faster, better, quicker, insert right adjectives. 2026 for me, and I think for most of us, is not about that. It's about redesign. And it's not about, here's how we do it, let's just put some tech on top. That's not redesign. That's just, you're going to get the same outcomes. You're not that reinvention. Is it harder? Sure. Does it require imagination, curiosity? Absolutely. And that reimagination piece is critical. Data will often let you do that because you'll ask the whys. You start asking the questions about, well, why is it we're doing that? Where did that come from? When you start to ask those questions, I think the reinvention drives that. And I think when you're starting to think about that, you're going to have a lot more data needs because you're going to move into things we've never done before. So my bad example before, which was pretty unimaginative, which was when we give advice, you should also give what are the next 3 implementation steps, right? Like if you think about that, at one level, could it be a plan that goes with that? Could it be like, how would you reinvent the way you give advice? So how many of our clients take the advice and do nothing with it? Where's that data? Have we got that? Is there anyone that has that? Have we asked the question? Do people want to action advice? How many clients are we going to talk to? How are we going to sample that? You're starting to think about those pieces around if you're going to redesign. So I think data, just like it does with product, and anytime you enter a product you're testing, you need to be thinking about data in that way. Can it inform this new outset? Does anyone offer that now? No. And as soon as you move into an area where you're leading the pack, you don't have data to give you comfort. So all you can do here is test the environment, gather what you've got, bring 2 data sets together, possibly multiple data sets to try to inform, take a leap of faith, and then use data to predicate it from there forward. So I think you're going to see, I think data is critical. If you're working with GenAI, you should be liberating, tagging, accessing data as much as you possibly can. For reasons the more that you ground, the more you anchor to good data, the better your results. So I think data is absolutely the heart of a law firm. And I think if you said, to your point about market data and benchmarking, what is it that we have for you? We have client data, so I can talk to you about what we've done with you and how we've worked. We have multi-party data where I can tell you what is the market, what is happening, what are we seeing, what is acceptable behaviour. Those 3 things are what we need to harmonise for the future, and that is our point of difference, and that is what the future is about, is bringing those things together in a way that really has impact.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I think we have covered quite a unique approach. I think it should be everyone's approach. I think it should be common, but it does feel quite unique, I'm afraid, in the legal market. I think what you're doing is absolutely fascinating. I think it's groundbreaking. I can see why the firm is willing to change fundamental metrics around what you are doing here, and I can see it working really well for clients. And I think the opportunities for the future sound absolutely incredible as well. So a really, really big thank you. I have one last question, which is I've been dying to ask the whole time. Like, where does this interest in data come from? Like, were you a scientist? Is science a hobby?
Yeah, I do have science background, but I think it's how I'm built. My team will joke about it. My family joke about it. And my husband and sons on a regular time will joke about it. Do I love my work? Yes. Am I looking at the data constantly? Yes. Am I analyzing it? Yes. Do I think about, wait, have we got data on that? Where would I get that from? Why don't they give us data? Am I constantly looking? It's just how I'm wired. So for me, I find my curiosity I have a very high curiosity metric. And so I really love to be driven by that. So it's sort of how I'm built, probably, is part of it. And then I think in a highly analytical, high performance environment, data becomes for you an incredible tool. And if you can wrangle and use it to tell stories and influence, and every time people say, oh, they want to give us objectives or they want to measure stuff, it's kind of fascinating to me where people kind of go, it's outrageous, they want to measure this. I'm like, oh my God, what measurements do you want? So I think that's sort of a bit how I'm built.
Michelle, thank you very much. I think law could do with a lot more science thinking, and I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.